Right.
It's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for attending this session this evening. And thank you, Jason, for giving me this opportunity. This is the first time I'm presenting here. I hope you like this session. Today, I would like to speak about Azure SQL security concepts. So basically, this is like an overview of what all layers we have in security in Azure space. This is not like a 400, 500 level session, but I would like to touch base with all of the concepts that we have and what each of them means. So hopefully you'll like it. So let's get started. As Jason mentioned everything, so I would like to skip this slide. But if you would like to contact me later with your questions, if you couldn't ask here, you can contact me on Twitter or you can also contact me on LinkedIn. It would be an honor to get in touch with you. Search by my name, Deepthi Goguri, you'll find me. Um, before beginning the session, I would like to start with an analogy, very simple analogy. Let's say a thief wanted to rob a bank, and he would like to go ahead and break the key, break the money vault in the bank. But before even touching the money vault, right, he need to cross several layers of security that are in place within the bank. Let's say he crossed the cameras, which are in place in the parking lot, let's say, and then he break the main door of the bank somehow. The bank was closed on the day, so he broke the bank and he broke the main lock. Let's say he entered into the little lockers that are in place in the first room that he entered, but each and every locker have that little key where he had to break. So he tried, he got frustrated, so he directly wanted to enter into the main money vault, but before entering into the main money vault door, the lock, he have to break the digital lock that is in place. So he tried couple of times. We have multi-factor authentication set in place. So he tried couple of times, and it caused an alert, which the alert is like call 911 automatically to let them know somebody is trying to trying to enter into the main money vault, and they couldn't enter because the digital lock is wrong. The key that he entered is wrong. So right now at this point of time, security guy know about it. He received a call alert through the automated system, and 911. The call went to 911. Police are arriving, and he couldn't even enter into the. He couldn't even break the digital lock to go to the main money vault. And there you are, he police arrived and they caught him. So this is like a physical bank, right? It is not even like it is not a computer, it's like a physical bank. So to enter into the main money vault, he have to cross, like, though he broke the though he tried to escape the cameras, he checked the blind spots, and somehow he did not get captured in the cameras, but he entered into the main door. He broke the main door, but then as you see, like, though he broke one of the layers, there is a different set of like complexity into the next layer, and get into the he couldn't actually get into the main money vault to get the money. In the same way, there are like several security layers in Azure as well. Like the the cameras, the security cameras which are in the parking lot for the bank. In the similar way, we have the outer layer of security, which we can say the network security. And as you go deep down, you have other layers of security, access management, um, threat protection, information protection, and any person who want to enter and see the data, you want to check the data, who is an unauthorized person, he have to break all of these layers, which is tough. So we are going to talk about each of these, what each of these layer means, and how it will actually protect your data in Azure. So let's talk about the outer layer of security, which is the network security. So here we have four different options. So let's say while you are building a Azure SQL database, you have this um, network security in like 4 layers of network security that you can choose. Left side from left, we'll talk about from left side to right side. Left side is the least secure. As you go move to the right side, it's the most secure. So let's talk about each of these options. Let's talk about allow access to Azure services, which is the least secure options. Once you, it's like an on and off button. So once you turn it on, anything in Azure can connect to your database, anything in Azure. But outside of Azure, your on-prem servers cannot connect to your database. There is not there is not that option. You know, you only Azure, any of the Azure services within Azure can connect to your database. So it will have the public IP address, and when you do the NS lookup, you can see all of that like hierarchy information. Where is your database hosted, like where, what region, and control ring information and IP address, all of that information is shown. But you might be thinking like, why do we even have this option, right? So it's like if you turn it on, like to do your testing or to do your development testing, if you build a new database and you wanted to quickly test something, then you can just turn it on and then do your job, and then like delete your database or turn this option off. That's why it's there. It's the least secure one. But when you see the next layer, firewall rules, these are the firewall rules that you create generally on your on-prem servers to connect to the different service. It's a similar way you create the firewall rules, like any service that wanted to connect to the Azure SQL database, you will create a firewall rule. So here you can have the on-prem connections. It still have the public IP address, and when you do the NS lookup, the ring control ring information where your database is hosted is public. It's still not secure, but better than the allow access to Azure services because you are creating firewall rule on each of the service connecting to the database. The next layer is virtual network rules. So here, let's say like your database is connected to different like many virtual networks. All of the virtual networks will be connected using like the latest technologies like VNet to VNet Express route kind of technologies to connect to all of those virtual networks together. But one virtual network will have a rule on the top of that virtual network, and that like our database will be connected to that virtual network. So there is only one rule that we will be creating, and it will have the private IP address, but still some of the information is still shown when you do the NS lookup, like control ring information and the region where the database is hosted is still visible. So it's not purely secure, you know. But if you use the private link by creating the private endpoint to your database, anything like on-prem or in Azure, any service should pass through that private endpoint to connect to your database. It's the most secure ones because it will block all of the public access, like internet will be disconnected completely. And anything in Azure or on-prem, they have to pass through this private endpoint. And if you do the DN like NS lookup, none of the information like we talked about will be shown there. So it is like really secure. So when I say like allow Azure services and resources to access this server, the first option, right, from the left side, which is not secure. So where do we see that option? If you have the Azure portal, go to portal.azure.com, log into the portal, and then go to the SQL server that you have built. Here in my demo, I'm using security demo. So once you clicked on that, underneath the security, we are talking about the security concepts, right? So underneath the security, go to the first option, which is networking. We are talking about the network security layers. So go to the networking, and there the first option, if you see the number one, it says like allow Azure services and resources to access this server. It is just like turning it on or off and then save. Say, so by clicking it on, anything in Azure can connect. So going to the second option, the firewall rule, I would like to disconnect, like I would like to uncheck the first one, which I did. And then the second one, you need to literally add the IP address here so that it will create a firewall rule and that service can actually connect to your Azure SQL database. So my local server, like my local machine, I wanted it to connect to the Azure SQL database. So I created a firewall rule by adding the IP address so that it can connect. So I added my firewall rule, right? So I went to my local SSMS SQL Server Management Studio and um, I, I connected through the logical server name and then I could connect because my firewall rule, I have added a firewall rule with the IP address of my server. So I could connect. And by going into the last option, so the last option is like the private endpoint. So where do we create the private endpoint? Again, go to the resource like SQL Server. Security demo is my SQL Server that I created. Underneath the security um, blade, left side, go to the networking, and there underneath the networking blade, right, go to the private access where you can go ahead and create the private endpoint for your database. So it is very simple to create a couple of the things that you need. So once I clicked on that, I have created it here. But all you need was like any um, any resource that you create, like no matter if it is a private endpoint or anything, you need to provide like the subscription details and the like on which virtual network you wanted to create, which region, all of that information, right? So after you create the private endpoint, now I created a private endpoint on a virtual network where I have the virtual machine created. So right now at this point, I went to that virtual machine. I connected to that virtual machine, which is hosted on that virtual network. And I connected to my Azure SQL database from there. And I executed this query, like where my connection is coming from, the client net address. And it have given me the IP address, which is 10.0.0.7. So I would like to see like where this is coming from. And I went ahead to my virtual machine that I created through the portal. If you see here, security VM is a virtual machine that I created on that particular virtual network. And if you see the private IP address, that is the IP address that is shown when I connected to the Azure SQL database. It's a private IP address. Let's talk a little bit about the identity and access management. So we have like authentication and authorization. These are the two different things. Authentication is like you are a user and you have to prove that you are the authorized user to enter into the system, enter into the Azure portal. So we have that multi-factor authentication available. It's a way of authenticating, right? Like when you try to log in, you get that you have that multi-factor authentication, the code sent to your phone. You need to type that two-digit number, like two-digit two-digit number into the portal. That's when you will be able to get into the system. That's a type of multi-factor authentication. And then you can also you can use like Azure for both of these Azure SQL database and managed instances. Use a you can use like SQL authentication as well as Azure Active Directory authentication, or you can just use the Azure Active Directory authentication only. But when you build, like for example, let's say you are building an Azure SQL database. While you are building an Azure SQL database, you need to also create a logical server while building your database. Because like a logical server is not the server itself, it is a way you connect to your database through your management studio. That's how you will be connecting and seeing your Azure SQL database. So as you build your logical server, you will be giving a authentication like SQL authentication ID and password. And that ID and password will automatically become the server level principal. And if you are building the managed instance, then that account, that ID and password will automatically becomes the sysadmin. It will become a part of sysadmin server role. And authorization is all about like permissions to your resources itself, to your tables, database, objects. So for both the Azure SQL and managed instances, it will support like additional like database roles and custom designed roles. And we can also have like low row level security, which is known as principle of least privilege. So as I mentioned, like when you build the logical server, right, the ID and password that you provide while building it, it will automatically becomes the server admin. So here my logical server name is DG test server. And if you see the server admin is Deepti. So I have given that Deepti as an ID while building this logical server. So there are also some specific role-based access control, like at least three of them, which are owner, contributor, and reader. So if you give the role of an owner, they can actually read, modify, and assign the resources to other people as well. They can read, modify, and assign. The contributor, they can read and modify, but they cannot assign other people to the resources. A reader, as the name itself says, they can just read. And these permissions can be in the hierarchy level. They can start all the way from the subscriptions resource group as well as the resources underneath those resource group. They can be inherited as well. So where do we see those basic three role-based access control? So here I have my logical server, DG test server. Once you open that up, left side your screen, you see the access control, which is IAM. Click on that and try to add a role assignment to just see those roles. So I try to add role assignment, and that's where you can go ahead and add add specific roles to the members. So the next tab says like member. So once you click on this and go to next, it will ask you like to whom you want to assign these roles. So these are the basic role-based access um, that are available in Azure, like owner. There are several others, but these are the three main built-in roles that are available: owner, contributor, and reader. And there are like logins, users, and differences. So what are the differences between like managed instance and Azure SQL database as per the logins and users? Like we discussed in the previous slides, we can create the SQL logins as well as Azure Active Directory logins. While building the managed instance, that ID and password will automatically becomes the server admin. So you can create the database users as well as contained users within the managed instance. Contained users are the users you do not have to have a login, but directly you have the ID and password where you can directly connect to the resource itself, like the database, and you can directly give the access to that user, that contained user. And when compared that with the Azure SQL database, we have um, we have like Azure Active Directory Server admin. We can create the SQL logins, Azure Active Directory logins. But here we have additional roles just to limit people from giving the server admin access. We have like login manager, DB manager, additional roles. And we can also create the database users, contained users. But any user, if you want to create any user on Azure SQL database, you have to log in as an Azure Active Directory server admin only. You can't log in as a SQL login, and you can't create the other logins. You have to be the Azure Active Directory server admin. So let's talk about the data encryption. We have multiple options here. So there are mainly three data encryption like options here. encryption in transit, encryption at rest, and encryption in use. Encryption in transit is all about like encrypting your data while it is being moved from the database to the application and from the application to the database. While it is being moved, it needs to be protected. And this encryption in transit happens through the transparent layer security, which we are going to talk about in the coming slide. And we have the encryption at rest. It's all about the files, like the database files, backup files. Are they being encrypted? Because these are on the drives, we need to make sure these are encrypted, and they are encrypted by default. And these are always encrypted by the transparent data encryption. And the third option is encryption in use. So while your data is being processed, while your queries are running, whether the query, like while the query is running, whether your data is being protected while the queries are running during the query processing, right? So there is something known as data enclaves, and encryption in use uses that data enclaves. So let's talk about the encryption in transit. Like I said, like it is an industry standard protocol, transparent layer security. You are enforced to use this option by default, and it will enforce all. It is enforced all the time for all the connections. But from your side, what you have to make sure is your application, from your application side, make sure like encrypted connection from applications, there is this option. Make sure it is always turned on. And the other thing that you need to focus on is like whether the TLS version that you are choosing in your Azure SQL database, is it applicable and is it valid with the application? Sometimes the TLS version, though, if you are using the old TLS version, it cannot be supported by your application, and you'll be having the connectivity issues connecting to your database. So you need to make sure like they both are aligning properly. It is always recommended to use the latest TLS version. So where do you see this transparent layer security and how do you choose, right? In my demo, DG test server is my logical server. So I connected to the logical server here. Again, networking, go to the security blade, select the networking. We have seen the other two options on the top, but this time go to connectivity. Underneath the connectivity, you have like encryption in transit. That's where you can choose the minimum TLS version. Um, you can choose the version you want, but always make sure like the recommended version is the latest version. Sometimes, sometimes you would not identify that you might be using the outdated one. So always make sure you use the right version, and also that version should be applicable and supported by your application. Encryption is at rest. It is all about the data which is inactive on the drives. It can be the data files, it can be the log files, backup files, right? So while the data is being pulled and pushed to the drives, make sure like again, this encryption at rest is automatically enabled, and it is enabled by default. And you have two options, right? Um, Microsoft managed keys. So encryption at rest is supported by Microsoft. If you choose like default option, meaning like it is Microsoft managed key, they will be rotating the keys and everything. You do not have to worry about that. But you can bring your own keys as well, and you can place those the keys that you have created. You can place them in the key vault. Key vault is an application available in Azure. It is like you need to pay for that service, but it is like you can create as many key vaults as possible. You can save your keys after you create. You can save your keys within those key vaults. So key generation, rotation, giving access, it's up to you if you are using bring your own key option instead of like my Microsoft managed key. So where do we see this option? Date like transparent data encryption at rest. So how do we do that? So again, security demo is one of my SQL server. Go to the security blade, select the transparent data encryption. And then here we have like, remember that we are doing the encryption at rest. This comes under the encryption at rest. You have two options here. You can either choose the service managed key or the customer managed key. Service managed key is nothing but it's by default. You need to change that option, and Microsoft is going to take care of that first option, service managed key. So here I would like to show customer managed key. If we choose customer managed key, what are the things that we have to perform? So I will be choosing customer managed key under the key selection method. So select a key. So if you do not have a key, currently I do not have a key. I need to build the key vault to place the key that I create. So I would like to go ahead and select on change key, but then I will go ahead and once you have the key, right? Once you have the key set in place in the key vault, you can go ahead and change the key if you want, but we do not have a key. So in order to create a key, you need to have a key vault. So by going, you can go ahead and search for the key vault on the top. Very simple. You need to like again, you need to provide the subscription ID and location and name of the key vault. You can create the key vault with few clicks. But then here, once you build the key vault, I would like to go ahead and go to the objects, and underneath the objects there are keys. Click on the keys to create the key. Remember, you can on the top you can generate or import the keys. If you have it outside, you can import them, but you can also generate. Here in my demo, I have created two keys, security demo 1 and security demo 2. I would like to click on one of them, security demo 1, to show like how it looks like. So while you are building, right, you have to give the activation date and the expiration date, the current version that you are seeing, like the digit that is automatically popped up. So once I click on that current version, I can see the details like what I have provided while creating that key. So the key type, RSA key size, all of those things are populated automatically, but I have to be more focused on like what is the creation date and expiration date, right? Expiration date. And if you wanted to give any permissions to this key to someone else, you can give right at the time like creating the key, you can give that underneath the permitted operations, like what kind of permissions are accepted on this key. You can choose that encrypt decrypt options, and then you have to give the permissions, right? So underneath the access policies, again, this is under the key vault. We have saved that key. So go to the access policy, and that's where you can give the permissions to those keys. So I have given my account to unwrap the key onto that particular key. So I have given me the permissions. Now I have created the key vault, created the key, gave the permissions onto that key. Now I'll go back to the transparent data encryption, which is underneath the security demo SQL server. Go to the security blade, transparent data encryption. Now we have choose the customer managed key, right? Now just go ahead and select the key, and underneath the keys, click on change key, where you'll get the option like which key you want to update for that option, right? So you have given the subscription details, and then what key vault are you using? You can have multiple key vaults. So what is the name of the key vault? Give the name of the key vault, what key you wanted to use, and what version. Remember, like if you are managing bringing your own key, this version will be outdated once it hits the expire date. So you need to come manually, and then you need to create a new version to update that key, and then go ahead and select, and then click on save, so that you have used the bring your own key in this option. Now let's talk about the third option, encryption in use. where this is like a client-side encryption technology. Um, Data needs to be encrypted and decrypted from the client side. So while the queries are getting processed, right? So there is this something known as client driver while using the data enclave. Um, will actually this drive will make sure like while the data is being processed from the client side as well as from the database engine perspective, it will make sure like your queries are being processed and encrypted while they are in processed. So the SQL client driver is a driver which the secure enclaves uses, and the data while it is being processed, right, and while it is being moved to the database client, this SQL client driver will make sure it is encrypted. So the database engine will delegate the operations on this encrypted data to the enclave, where the data can be securely decrypted as well as processed. So most of the operations, right? There are certain operations that this secure enclave will use, like the queries which have the range queries, right? Greater than, less than, and if you have any sorting, and if you have any indexing, those sort of queries will use the secure enclaves. And let's talk a little bit of dynamic data masking option we have. And it comes under the security option again. Dynamic data masking is not the encryption at rest. These are two different things. Like if you have like dynamic data masking enabled, that doesn't mean like your data is encrypted on the drives, right? Encryption at rest is automatically enabled, but these are two different things. Dynamic data masking is all about like encrypting your data inside your objects. Like you will permit people who can see your data. It's like dynamic data masking that we have on-prem. So how do we add data masking option in Azure? Here I'm using AdventureWorks database, and go to the AdventureWorks database, like any database that you have built. It's a SQL, Azure SQL database, and you have the security options even underneath the database as well. Until now, we have seen the logical server. At the server level, we have the security laid and all the options. We can also see that under the database. So the options that you see under the database is a little bit different. If you see, you have dynamic data masking here. Click on dynamic data masking, and if you want to add a mask, click on add a mask, and there are only a couple of details that you need, like the schema. You need to select the schema, table, and the column. You'll get that in the drop down menu. And as you select the column, table, and the schema, it will automatically give you the function, the mask function. Once you do then once you create these masks, you can go ahead and just like the way you give the permissions to other people to access, you will give in the similar way you can give the access to other people to like unmask and mask permissions. In the similar way you can give on this database as well. And we have threat protection and detection. So underneath the threat protection, we have Azure Defender. So underneath the Azure Defender, we have SQL vulnerability assessment. So it's all about like, are we following the Azure standards? Microsoft Azure standards. There are certain standards that we need to follow. So if you enable the Azure Defender, it will continuously go ahead and check for these vulnerability issues, like whether the database that you designed, whether it is aligning um, with those standards. If not, it will give you the list of assessment details where you can go ahead and implement, or you can just ignore them as per your needs. And there is also SQL threat detection underneath the Azure Defender. If a bad actor trying to access your database from different locations, suddenly you'll get an alert. You can set up the alerts in such a way that you'll receive the email immediately once once somebody tries to log in. You'll get that triggered, and then you'll get the notification. And you can also see that underneath the Azure Security Center. So Azure Security Center is like a one-stop shop where you can see all of this information together, like the vulnerability assessment, threat detection, details, all of that. And we also have the SQL auditing. Um, just like the way we audit the SQL on-prem, we can also audit your data in Azure. Now let's see like Azure Defender. So you can to access to use the Azure Defender, you need to pay for that service. Like it is clearly mentioned there, it costs 15 USD dollar per month per server. Um, so while you turn it on, you can go ahead and you have to provide certain details. Like I said, like any service that you wanted to create, right? You need to provide the subscription details and um, a resource group and all of that. But this is like a tool that we are using. So we will just create the subscription, and then where do you want to store the results of this Defender? Like once you do the assessments, you can choose like the storage account. If you do not have one, you can create it here. And you can also send the scan reports to the email address. You can provide the email address here, and then you can go ahead and enable it. Enabling it is simple. So you once you enable it, you can't see the details immediately. You need to give certain amount of time for it to go ahead and do the assessment and scan your resources. So one like I have given certain amount of time, and I have went to the DG test server, which is my logical server, and underneath the security, I went to Microsoft Defender for Cloud. I have seen like couple of recommendations and findings here. So if you see the bottom of the page, you have like you can either click on the top, like recommendations, or you can also see the additional recommendation in Defender for Cloud. So I have clicked on that to see more of these details in the recommendations. So it have given me like couple of like it listed couple of things here, and it have seen like security score 81%, and the red active items which shows like mostly recommended one. And if you see the insights, like the bottom screen, like right side of your screen, it says like red color, the color insights as well. You can see like what are these, and like um, how many resources are being affected and unhealthy, and click on them to see more of the details. So I have clicked, like you can see that underneath the server level, right? These details, but you can also see the same details at the database level on the database, like what are the recommendation at the database level. So go to the database, Adventure Works here. Underneath the security blade, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, we have it here as well. So it shows like three findings. I would like to go ahead and click on that to see more details. So it have given me like a vulnerability assessment findings. You see each of those findings have an ID. Um, that is from the standards, right? From the Azure standards. So it says like database owners as expected, and couple of other things. And the severity level is looking like high. So I would like to click on one of them to see more details. So I have clicked on that database owners are as expected, but then here it is saying severity level high. It have provided me the description, and it clearly says like remove unnecessary database owners. There are many of them. And here is the script that you can implement this. You can just run the script, or you can directly like you can also ignore this baseline. You have that option. You can choose that option. You can add this certain thing to the baseline, like or you can remove it from the baseline. But you have the query in place to remove, right? And then it shows like what are who like list of the owners that are that have this database owner role and everything. But it is up to you to just take action or just ignore. And then the similar way we have the auditing as well. Here again, I'm clicking on the DG test server, which is a logical server. And underneath the security blade, we are going to the auditing. And here the auditing is turned on. but you need to make sure like how you want to select, like where you want to place the results, auditing results. um, and you have to also make sure like if you are um, auditing at the server level as well as auditing at the database level, there might be like uh, double amount of data that can be created. So if you are turning it on the database like server level, all the database that comes underneath the logical server will be automatically audited. You can go ahead and um, just to do the auditing at the database level independently as well. You need to provide the subscription and where you want to store this data details. You can save it in the storage account, or you can create the log analytics workspace, separate workspace for this. If you do not have, you can create the workspace here. If you can see underneath the log analytics, I have clicked on the workspace. I have created it here. And the last option that you have here, if you see the bottom of the screen, it says like enable auditing of Microsoft support operations. So basically, you can turn this off, but the only reason why you have to turn this on is like if you are opening any ticket with Microsoft, if you are having an issue with them, uh, they need to, if they have to have the access to your auditing details, then so once you turn that auditing on, underneath the database, you can go to the security auditing and you can click on view audit logs. That is a place where you can see the all the logs centralized. And I have clicked on that underneath the database, right? And it shows me like view dashboard. Once I click on that, it will provide me like some bar chart, something like that. So Azure SQL, like if you see the circle over here, chart that is related to the data governance. I'm going to talk about that in the coming slide, but here let's click on the security insights Azure SQL. And once I click on that, it will give me the more details, security insights, where it will be giving me like what all auditing details it collected. So I'll be clicking on that audit distribution to see all the details. Um, so here you can see the you can you can actually execute the query here itself to grab the details filtered out. Like if you wanted to get the details of any specific timings, you can you can use the query to run and grab the details. But it is similar way that we have the auditing details. We have the query, who executed it on which instance, and database principal, and what are all the details will be visible here underneath the logs. And this here I have created the default workspace, so that's how it is showing me here. And the data governance is nothing but like um, if you're having any sensitive data, like for example date of birth, SSN details, credit card details, and if you want to know who is accessing those sort of details, like if if somebody tries to do any selects on that particular columns, you can actually tag those columns as sensitive. Very simple to create those tags. And if some once you create those tags, you are classifying your data, and if anybody try to access those columns, you will get an alert mentioning like what uh, w- who did that, like through logs. Again, we are auditing, right? Through logs, it will go ahead and capture that data. So how do we do that? Like underneath the database, AdventureWorks database, go to the like security blade. Underneath the security blade, go to the data discovery and classification. And once you select that, um, you have the drop down where you will select the schema, table, column, and how do you want to label the column, right? Highly confidential and confidential. And you can also give the information type, whether it is a financial, you have like lot of like different types of data. So you can choose from it and then you can enable it. And once you enable that option, again, it will be collected underneath the auditing details, and I have chosen the default workspace. So I have clicked on that, and I would like to see like who accessed these columns, right? So I have clicked on that chart over there, which will again give me the amount of details. Like you can clearly see like who accessed the data, and what query has actually executed. So here in my case, I have chosen like product ID, sales order ID as sensitive just for my demo purposes. And I have, you know, outside like using Management Studio, I have executed a couple of queries so that it will get captured, and it is automatically get captured in the logs through auditing. So I believe like I covered all of the layers like as an overview. But if you'd like to go to detail of this, like an extension of this session, you can go ahead and choose the Azure category under my blog, where you have like I have talked about more of this topic in my blogs. And also like there is an entirely different uh, series of series of videos from Microsoft. um, Anna Hoffman has hosted many of them. So each layer that I have talked about have a entire different session, like 1 hour to 1.5 hour of session. Like I have watched all of them, and I tried max to make a single presentation out of all of them, and I have learned a lot. But if you'd like to go more detail into each of those security layers, please go ahead and watch these resources. It's very valuable. And I would like to thank Jason one more time for giving me this opportunity to speak at your user group. And here are my contact details again. And I would like to thank everyone for attending this session today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Are there any questions out there before we put a bow on this?
One question. First of all, thank you. Very nice coverage of like very many topics. You really tied them all together and made a package out of it. My question is do you have any advice for a development database versus a development database that has no real data in it, only synthetic data, as opposed to a production database that has real meaningful data in it? In a developer database, which of the security layers do you typically put in place?
That's a nice question. So which layer are you talking about? Like if you talk about like network security layer, the top layer, right? I would always encourage for the production like private endpoint, but um, in my like for my development purposes, if I'm building something, if you were me, like I would like to use like firewall rules if I'm only connecting to couple of resources. Like if some of the resources are connecting to my development database, then I would go ahead and use the firewall rules. But if many people and many services have to access your database, then you need to go ahead and look into that last two options, which is like private endpoint or the um what is the other one, the oh my the virtual network rule. I would not suggest the least option, the first option, allow access to Azure services. I will not choose that option. And
I
this is
see. Not even in a dev database. Got it.
no, not even in the
Thank you.
database, no, because anything in Azure can connect, anything. I don't want
Yep.
that.
Thank you again, Deepthi.
Thank you so much. Anything else from me today? I would like to share, like I will be sharing these slides with you, Jason. Later, I will be sending you the link,
Awesome.
or yeah, I'll be sending, or I can share you the GitHub repo of mine.
Sure.
That way you can.
Whatever works for you.
Yeah, sure, I'll do that.
So Andrew's got a quick question. So would not Andrew, sorry, Russell has a question. So would secure enclaves protect against a user doing select star from employee order by name?
It have order by init, right? So certain operations are secure enclave uses certain operations. I mean, like if you go down deep into the query level, like order by, they clearly mention like order by greater than less than, it uses the secure enclave. But if there is an entirely different session on like security enclave, if you would like to go more into it, um, but as an outline, yes, it should.
Yeah, I came off mute. I meant if they order by salary. So if someone selects everything from a list of employees trying to find the person with the most pay, secure enclaves are a way to protect them against doing that. Protect the system from people seeing that kind of information.
Oh, protect. uh, I think while it is being processed, right? Because um, that option, like security enclaves, like that option is just while the data is being processed, while the SQL engine is doing the operations behind the scenes. But the to encrypt itself, like people not seeing the data itself, that's when the data masking comes in place. And like if it is in the drive location, then we need to protect that. That's automatically done through encryption at rest.
Okay,
And
thank you.
yeah,
Looks like that's all the questions. Going once, going twice. Well, very good. Great presentation. Lots of good information there. I'm going to be looking back through this at least a time or two because a lot of good stuff in there. So thank you again, and everyone have a good evening.
thank you, Jason. So how many attendees do we have today? I just wanted to know the max.
15.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.